Hey everybody, today we're going to do a video for map design tips for isometric RPGs. Getting into it, this is especially relevant right now because we have access to the Isometric plugin for playing isometric style in Foundry VTT, but the tips that I'm going to talk about today should be relevant across any role-playing game that uses an isometric sort of battle mat, whether that be Dungeons & Dragons or something else. And this is also valuable in other tabletop tools, since while I think Foundry might be the one that's got the best isometric support right now, I know there's a lot of players out there in Roll20 and other tools where they want to take advantage of this, especially while we're still playing so much virtual Dungeons & Dragons. Okay, so this is the thing that we built last time, my sort of pretend gaming table setup that I made in Blender with these tokens that I'm populating. And now that I've started to spend a lot of time in Blender making some of my own maps, I have to think about, well, some of the basics of map design, because really at the end of the day, all of this is all about the players of my game and making sure that they're able to read and understand what's going on in the isometric maps that we create, so they can easily navigate, so they can read the map and understand what's on top of what, and be able to see all the squares that they're going to be navigating through, and dealing with some of the challenges of isometric map design where they can't move their head around the way that they could to get different camera angles on something that was actually physically in front of them. So here's what I'm going to cover. We're going to cover a bunch of concepts, and I'm going to use a lot of terminology from the theater world, even though I'm not from the theater world. But some basic concepts here. Diorama box, how to deal with uphill, putting gaps between rooms, and thinking about balconies. So that's trying to keep a quick video here, and maybe in a future video I'll explore more of these topics with conversion from some actual examples from my game. So the first concept is the diorama box. What you see below here is the diorama black box from a actual Broadway production. I found these pictures on the internet. This is from a play called Hadestown, where the set designer has gone and made like a little miniature setup to show the scale and the color and the lighting of the actual set. And you'll see here on the right, there's the actual actors in the set, and you can see how they match up. Now, the neat part about this is that it's a perfect example of some of the challenges we have in a fixed camera angle. In a set with a play, the audience can't get up and walk around to a different seat to see a different angle. They're kind of stuck with what they're stuck with. So the play has to work from the audience's angle, which doesn't change throughout the whole thing. And these set boxes are a good example, where what they actually have to remember is that they tell the whole story using only the back wall and the floor, right? The actors can't interact with the invisible front-facing wall, the wall that's sort of invisible, that's between the audience and the actors. That wall doesn't exist, right? They're speaking out into space, just like your isometric minis are. So you have to remember that we're now working in this isometric box where it is a diorama, and we're going to put all of the interesting things for the players to look at on the floor and the two back walls of the isometric angle. So let's see it in Foundry. So I've created a gaming table setup here with a bunch of props and tokens loaded so I can explain these concepts. So when I say diorama box, this is what I'm talking about right here. I'm talking about this diorama box right here. So the back wall is useful for explaining, they're in a stone wall with some arches, right? It gives a sense for where we are. And the floor here, I've got 3x3 tiles that the players can use to stand on, and all of them are easily seeable because I have not put the front wall at all in the scene. I haven't made it transparent. I've just deleted it so that you can't see. This is actually an epic isometric piece of art that I've taken into 3D and done a little bit of extra 3D modeling to extrude some of the faces to make them pop out and pick up some of the light and shading. But let's go over here to a different set. This is the same dimensions of room. It's a 3x3 room, but I've left the front-facing walls. I've left those on the mini, and you can see that it doesn't work at all. There's actually 3 minis in here, and you can't really see them, right? You're missing the one that's standing right there because it's being obscured by the front wall here. Here's the same scene again with the front wall removed, And now I can see that, yeah, while it looks like, there's 2 walls missing from the room, if I actually think about it, I'm so used to playing video games or watching, sitcoms, right, where you're only able to see, it's like a set where you only really get to see the back wall and you tell the whole story with that. So just think about your map designs and dioramas and you'll go really far. And this works really well even for complex setups. So let me scroll over here where I've got a more complex, I've got some tokens set up already. So this pirate character, this PC, enters from the bottom, and even walking through some slightly obscuring terrain, I can really understand the setup here. And then maybe there's a monster here to meet him. Here, just cutting out some of the walls and for the long hallways, maybe not even putting up a wall at all, I can understand what kind of a room I'm in only by having this back diorama wall here. You just got to make sure that the stuff that's immediately in the hallway outside, that these are effectively unimportant squares for your adventure, because no one really wants to play with their character kind of half in front and half behind a wall. Make sure that the scene takes place in these squares right here. So the next tip I want to talk about is dealing with uphills. So this is like a side view with a camera, 2 actors, and a mountain. So you want to think about this as you need to be facing the side of the mountain that you actually want to see. You need uphill moving away from the camera, not towards the camera. Because if it was towards the camera, the hill itself would obscure the stuff on it. Let's show this in Foundry and it'll make a little bit more sense. So here, in this kind of uphill area of the map, we have stairs going up. If I take a mini and I start at the bottom of the hill and I start walking up the hill, it works great, right? Because uphill is sort of towards the GM screen, is another way of thinking about it, away from the camera. If uphill, if the downhill started where this Coke can was and uphill moved towards the front, towards the bottom of the screen, towards the camera, this wouldn't work at all because you'd sort of like not even be able to see the squares that you're standing on. So this is a pretty shallow staircase, so it's not so bad. So if I move this frog character, I can kind of see the squares that he's standing on. I might have to hit shift click because they don't match up directly with the grid because they're sort of like half elevations here. But I can see those squares just fine. But there is a downhill element on this set, and it's whatever's over this wall. So whatever's past this wall, I can't see. That downhill, I don't really want to interact with what happens when I jump past this wall. I want to jump past this wall, right? That makes sense. If that was passable, if I was like a balcony, I wanted to jump off of it, that would be fine. But I don't want to interact with the wall that's over here. That would not be a good design. So I would kind of want to have that be off limits and not really something that's part of the story or part of the design. All right, next tip is I need to put space between the rooms. And the reason is if I'm going to have a wall there, the actual wall obscures the tiles that are right behind it, right? So you can see here, if I put a gap that is twice as long as the height of the wall, I should be fine. And I should be able to see all of the squares that I might have a player to do combat on just fine. So I'm going to demonstrate this, but I'm going to demonstrate it using a map from Tomb of Annihilation. So dangerous spoilers ahead. Okay, so now we're looking at Photoshop, and I've got a bit of the map from Tomb of Annihilation. I'm going to show some examples. So here, because in this set I've got a wall, but the room that's behind it is like this this little river, and there's negative space between the room and the river. And that's okay, because while this is, maybe a 10-foot tall wall, I've got plenty of space back here before I hit the next room, and that's good. Next bit is that if I don't have that space, I don't draw the wall. So here you can see there's a room, which is fine, but I did not draw a wall here, because if I did, it would really get too close to the next room over. And if the minis came back, I'd have to hide the room, or I'd have to mess with transparency or mess with plugins. It's so much easier if you just leave big, thick negative space between the walls. And you'll find after doing this for a bit, it doesn't really spoil any of the immersion. Maybe inside like a cottage or a house where there's supposed to be really thin walls, where the house really only makes sense if it's a certain shape, this gets tougher. You might want to use some of the advanced features of the Grape Juice Isometric plugin, but especially in a dungeon or a sewer with tunnels and things, you want to have these long hallways, right, before you get to these set piece rooms. So like that's a set piece right there. Something really interesting is going to happen in that room. But, you know, the area between the two set pieces can just be a long hallway, and that gives you plenty of space to work with in isometric. So the last trick is you want to think about putting the balconies on the back wall of your diorama set. Because you put them on the front wall, everything's going to get messed up. Let's show an example in Foundry. So here you can think about this elevated area as if it was a balcony with players able to stand above and below it. So you can see here, this is clearly about 10 feet tall because it's about 2 of these grids. And I can have a character that stands right at the tip of the balcony. I have another character down below that can see him, right? So maybe they could exchange arrow fire or something like that. And then if I take a third character, it could actually be on the square that's below the balcony right here, and it would work just fine because in this isometric plugin, it's really identifying where the base is. Now, there's another fun pro feature here of the Grape Juice Isometric, which is that it actually adjusts the location if I'm doing flying. So I right click and I move this character. If he can fly and he can move 5 feet up, the base still sort of identifies what square the person's in. Right, so if he's flying, gets 10 feet up, now he's actually side by side and adjacent to that character. So they could engage in melee right there if this was a flying character. And then let's, if I actually move him up onto the thing, then I could go and disable the flying by setting this to 0. Right, and actually moving the mini where he's actually physically standing on the surface there. And that will work fine. So for these balconies, as long as they're on the back wall, it's going to be fine. That's all great until you're trying to run a module that has pre-made maps that have, some really important tactical elements on them, where maybe there's balconies on both sides. Balconies on the side that's closest to the camera and balconies on the side that's farthest from the camera. Or maybe there's some things that rooms that are really close to each other on the map, and you're going to have to convert them to put space in between, and it's going to take a lot more work. So next time we're going to show a couple modules that I've used to break up some of these pre-made maps and kind of work with them to get the spirit of what we're trying to do from a pre-made map from Curse of Strahd, but without making it too complex for the users to understand. It's always a little complicated, but we try and keep it simple enough that the players can still just kind of ignore it and play D&D and understand what's going on by just like pointing out where things are coming from. All right, so next time, Curse of Strahd, lots of spoilers for a couple of the maps there. But if you like this, subscribe. I'm having a lot of fun running isometric in my game, and I continue to want to put out videos for folks. I love interacting with people in the comments and in Discord. So, have a great holiday. If I don't, or maybe if this video got posted after the holidays, don't worry about it. Click subscribe and follow along. Thanks.